One of the ways to analyze culture and change readiness is through surveys. These can reach the whole organization and can cover a broad range of subjects. But I need to lift a veil about current surveys. They have problems, and big ones. You'll recognize these questions from the traditional employee engagement survey and the Net Promoter Score. Traditional surveys are based on the so-called 5 or 10-point Likert scale, which was invented in 1932. 1932, the same year as the radio telescope, before the photocopy, and transistor radio 20 years later, let alone the desktop computer some 42 years later. But you gotta give it to the scale. It's easy to use, as it is based on simple subjective answers. No thought is required to design the survey responses. No thought whatsoever. For example, it's not required to define what useful feedback on performance actually is. It's left up to each respondent to define this, which is different for every single respondent. To be able to use the scale, emotive, positively and negatively charged questions have been developed to try and get information for which this survey was not made. Based on this, projects are developed to improve or bring teams together in case of M&As, and surprisingly enough, projects fail. Here's why. These surveys are focused on the past. Every time I think about this, I hear the investment disclaimer, past performance is not indicative of future results, or does not guarantee future performance. How often do you see this come up? A lot, right? The questions are not exact. What's useful for me is different to what's useful to anyone else. And if you ask someone what they would do, doesn't mean they will or that they have. Furthermore, the answers lack meaning. Agreeing to useful or a question about good culture doesn't say anything about what usefulness is or the cultural elements that are in place. Or the numbers. I'm Dutch. Our good is nothing above a 6. I grew up in the States. Their good is nothing under an 8. Let alone if I'm in a bad mood, my answer moves to a 5. Answers to emotive questions change even for the same person on different days. More importantly, the answers do not give any insight into actions that are required to improve. Even if we were to take all this as a given, the outcomes are actually unreliable. Let me show you what I mean by this. The Likert scale is a so-called ordinal scale, which is non-linear. This means the distance between answers is not the same. From neutral to agree, seemingly 1 point, is not the same size as agree to strongly agree. And as strange as this may sound, even on a 1 to 10 scale, from 6 to 7 is different from 8 to 9 because each person's view about agreeing is different. Parametric statistics are applied. This means the outcomes are averages, medians, standard deviations, so they can be put into bell curves. Bursting the bubble, or the bell in this case, parametric statistics requires a linear scale and as such cannot be applied to an ordinal scale. Unfortunately, this means that the trended historical data is incorrect too. You can imagine that survey providers do not want you to know about this. It's a waste of millions around the world on these types of surveys.